For today, we are going to build on what we learned last week, of course, and we are going to work towards making a Pinterest board using Node.js as an example. So for that, again, I'm recording it, and you have these notes on the side that kind of give you the theoretical breakdown of what we're doing, when, how, why, etc. So if you're following along today, which I do recommend, let me make sure I'm recording correctly. Sharing my screen. Okay, let's hide this. If you are following along today, which I recommend, then open the starter folder in VS Code. One thing to just make sure you're doing right is in this starter folder, like if you open the folder correctly, you should see the folder name here and server.js right under it. And again, this is the general steps you're supposed to follow for this given folder structure so that when you try to select this file and maybe run and debug it in VS Code, VS Code finds this file as the first thing to read, and it's not confused when it's trying to find any of these views or any other folder really. As long as it's structured correctly and opened properly in VS Code, you should face no problems. By the way, most of the submissions I've seen, I've already started grading Coding Challenge 6 because you are getting assigned Coding Challenge 7 today, and it depends on 6. So I wanted to make sure we have the feedback in as soon as possible. So to summarize, I'm quite happy with this batch's performance. Y'all are grasping on, y'all seem to be from the submissions, grasping onto concepts pretty okay. Do you disagree? I know it's difficult.
Kind of sure, but also just
Yeah, no,
right in the middle of it.
I understand. This course is a little tricky. And if you need more help, do let me know. Or if you want to stop and go over anything. In today's class, we'll kind of integrate more of the MongoDB that we learned with our application. And we will see if a user does submit some information, how can we receive and translate that and push it onto our database and then display that information. So our folder structure changes here a little bit. All right, as I said, we are creating a Pinterest board. So what you'll find here is your regular server.js. Package.json has the folder with all of the modules that you must have installed, or in this case, you have been provided, which includes EJS, Express, and MongoDB. Okay, those are the 3 modules we'll need for today's example. Any other modules that came by default in your Node.js application, their description and information, everything is available here. And those modules, you can see the folders of them in Node modules, in the Node module subfolder. Views is something we've been seeing since week 5, under which you have your EJS templates. They look quite a lot like your HTML files. However, now we know that they are a templating framework that we use along with Express. So that's what you have in your views folder. Pins currently has a couple of more EJS files that are currently empty that we'll get to in a bit. And partials, does anyone remember what partials are from last week? Why do we create? Yeah.
They're basically like templates.
Yeah.
Certain parts of your website that you tend to reuse.
Correct. Perfect. So they are your reusable components that you can integrate in your EJS files. So that's what our partials folder is. Now, besides that, we have something new over here, which is very important, your database subfolder. Within that, you have database.js. And initially, we were working with server.js to connect with our database, but it's good to keep things separate, especially now that our project and ideas are growing. So we've moved database.js into a subfolder over here. All right. Here is where we will use the MongoDB module to make a connection with our database. So let's just get started and go over server.js firstly. So everything always begins from server.js. It's like the main manager of our application. Again, we have included Express because we'll use that. Later on, you'll see that we are using Express as a middleware for EJS. So this permits server.js to render any EJS templates that we create. You'll see there are two new modules, or relatively new modules, I believe, that we haven't seen before. You have path. Path, I think we must have seen earlier. We use the function join that comes with the path module in order to give server.js access to our current directory. By doing so, you're saying that any file that's within this folder called public in our current directory, a server.js has access to. And as you know, public has our static assets like your CSS or any other JavaScript with regards to maybe responsive design that you may want to include. Your EJS templates can now use it because in server.js, we use the path module to connect this file to the external files inside our public folder. Okay. Scrolling back up, we have a new module that we haven't seen before, which is body parser. Now, as I said in today's class, we'll see how we can create a form, have the user submit some data, and get it to this over our server on the back end and save it in the database. So what body parser does is it allows the back and forth communication. So far, we were only displaying responses in the front end, right? So in response, show index.ejs. Okay, it was your routes look something like this, that in the default route in response, send in like index, right? This is how you were creating your routes before, and you may have noticed that it's always response. We've never used this request variable, and that's because we haven't ever received information from the front end. When the user submits a form or anything, we are going to request for that data on submission, and that's when we'll use this request parameter. In order to have, again, that back and forth over your server, we are using this body parser module. Okay, so that's another thing that we have imported or required to set up our project. The rest is kind of what we've seen before. The port number, we're creating an express instance. Using that instance, we are calling different routes, or we are creating different routes. Currently, we only have one, which is blank. Okay, just make sure this is response.send, not render. That might be a mistake in the code that I provided. So sorry about that. Just make sure it's response.send. And that's our default route that's available in the setup. You'll also see that we have body parser here. We're just calling that module on our express instance. It's deprecated syntax and I haven't updated this code, but it'll still work. There shouldn't be any issues. The rest we just have, we're setting up our server on port 3000. We're giving server.js access to the CSS files. And what this is, we'll get to in a second. Let's start building our code. We know that we have some code in index.ejs. Let me minimize this. Under views, we have index.ejs. And currently, if you open that, you'll see that we have this vague jQuery, a few lines of jQuery code up here. And if you just search for masonry.js, this is essentially, as I said, we are trying to create our Pinterest board, right? So masonry allows us or gives us access to a grid layout. So it's a grid layout JavaScript library that allows you to create something like this, or you can see different examples over here. So we just used a snippet of that code and we'll use this for styling. So we don't need to get into it. It's mainly code that we've copy pasted from here that allows us to create a grid-like layout. Okay, that's what masonry is for you, as you can see here. Following that, we have a div, which is essentially a container, and we've added comments saying that layout pins here. So each individual pin that we'll display, okay, when we do create our Pinterest board, that'll go in here. I'm guessing you'll have worked a little with Bootstrap in your previous semesters at all. Little bit, I think so. Even if you haven't, these classes are essentially what we are using for styling purposes. So some of that styling may be coming from our CSS. Otherwise, if you go to partials in the head, I believe, you can see that we are using, yeah, we are using Bootstrap for styling purposes. So all of our class names are coming from there. Don't worry about not knowing Bootstrap for now. Just know that these class names are coming from an external source in index.egs. Okay, we don't want to shift focus onto that, but these class names, some of them like px4, gx5, etc., these are classes that we are using from Bootstrap. Okay, yeah. Coming back to our code, let's try to render our index.egs. So we do have our default route created over here, but currently it's not sending anything back in response. So let's start coding. Yeah, we're here. So in order to display index.egs within this response.send function, we need to call the EGS file that we want to render, which is index. And currently, we are not seeing any EGS syntax on the front end. So we don't need to pass any information to the front end. We can just leave empty curly brackets. As you know that you can actually render index.egs like this as is, or another way is passing some parameter or some value to the front end. Currently, we don't require anything, but we are going to display our pins if we are creating a Pinterest board on the front end. So let's leave that empty right now, a placeholder for information that is to come. Now, by doing this, technically index.egs should be, if it's ready to render, then we could have run our code. But you may observe that currently, if we try to run our code, there is no opening HTML tag or closing. So how can we fix that? Yeah, you can link the partials. So the EGS syntax for that is pointed bracket, percentage sign, minus, if I'm not wrong, even I get confused. Yeah, okay, minus sign, include within brackets. You mentioned that inside the partials folder, we have the head of our page, so head.egs, percentage sign, and pointed brackets. I'm just going to make duplicates of this line of code. The way to do that is just Shift Alt down. And I'll just copy these two lines at the bottom as well. And we can then change the file name. So after the head of our page comes the header. And we'll go into these files and see what the difference is if you'd like, and make sure we're doing it correct. So footer, and then lastly, foot. Okay, I just have this open over here if you're missing out on code or I'm switching between pages. But if we go to the head of the page, you know that it has the HTML opening tags. The header consists of this navigation that you have been provided with. Footer is your copyright. And in order to close our HTML tag and the body as well, we have the foot.egs file. For your own project, if you don't want to use so many partials, it's fine. You can just have one footer and maybe one head, if that's going to be your consistent opening and closing for your page, components that you want to create. So let's save this. Now, again, if we're calling any of these files, we will get an error if they are expecting a title that we haven't provided. So over here in head.egs, just to make sure that every page has its own dynamic title to identify what we are displaying there, we have this EGS syntax, which is expecting some value for this page variable. Okay, so wherever you're calling head.egs, you also need to pass some value for that variable pages, or sorry, page, right? So comma, curly brackets within page, you can mention that the title for this main home page is, let's say it's home. Okay, we are covering a lot today, so I just want to make sure syntax is correct. Now that this is done, I don't see any other things that are pending for us to do. The code, you haven't provided a lot of this, so I think we can just go ahead and try to run our server and deal with any errors that come. Let me close this. So let's make a separate tab. Okay. The way to run your code is, again, select server.js to make sure that's the JavaScript file that runs. No other file gets rendered. Go to run and debug and run. The first time you're running your project, VS Code might ask you what environment you want to run it in. So you'll select node.js. And now that it's running on port 3000, I can go here, localhost 3000, and we have our first error for the day. Let's see what we have. Range error, invalid status code. Haven't seen that before. But let's go over what we have. We have our asynchronous function that is reading our index file. That should be right. Okay, so we created our index file, we rendered it. Then inside index.ejs, we went over masonry. Okay, we should see some div to get displayed, but we haven't gotten to that yet. We included some partials. Header. Okay. Range error. I wonder. Okay. Let me know if you spot any potential issue, but currently we haven't done anything, so it should come. Let me just try to run it one more time. It's running properly, but when I'm trying to load index.ejs, we're getting an error. Let's see, we have called partials correctly. Views, we didn't have to do anything in server.js. I'm just going to try to maybe move app.listen port 3000 to the end of our, basically move the rendering of our CSS files first. Let's see if that fixes things. Refresh. No, we're still getting the issue. Okay, because I also open, are you all getting an error? Yeah. Okay, so let's try to do npm install. Maybe it's not reflecting the modules that we have installed, which is why body parser is not accessible. Should be fine. Okay, it did install these packages. It did not give me a notification that they are already installed. So now let's try running it again. No, still getting an error. Localhost refused to connect. If I figure out this error, we should eventually figure out this error. Let's see, response.send. Sorry, give me a second. Okay, the issue should be that it shouldn't be response.send. Maybe it should be response.render for now. Let's save this, run and debug. Yeah, so our issue was the function. I thought it should have been response.send, but it actually should have just stayed to be response.render. And that renders our index.ejs file for us. At this point, are you all seeing the output? We have this Pinterest logo that's coming. A responsive navigation is what you should have. That has just one option to create a new pin and nothing currently displayed. I'll go back here. We changed just response dot in our root, in our default root. This should have been render. Okay, so render view is what we should have used with our Express and EJS in order to display our EJS file. Is it working for everyone? Yeah. So the next thing that you may want to think about is we don't have any pins. So if we do connect to our database and we try to display all of our pins, what if there are none? We might face an issue or an error. So let's just tackle that already. In case there are no pins here to display, we should just say something like no pins exist. So in order to do that, we can create a sort of a div that displays that message. But in order to check if we have any pins or not, that information is going to come from server.js. So in this bracket where we are currently passing nothing, let's say eventually we do have some pins to show, but currently we don't have any. So let's pass a variable called pins to the front end and set it to be null for now. Okay. Later, if we do have information coming from the database, we can change this null to whatever we get from MongoDB. For now, we'll let it be null. And coming back here, we can write a line of code. So right after call, so we are going to lay out all of our pins here, right? So for each individual pin, this is the layout that we are creating. Let's say no pins exist, then we might want to create another div over here. The way to do that is by using if-else condition. So in order to include JavaScript inside your EJS file, the syntax is pointed bracket percentage sign with nothing that follows except the closing tag. In here, you can specify that if no pins, so exclamation mark pins, or with two straight lines, if the length of the variable pins that's coming from the server.js file, if the length of that array or that object is less than equal to 0, which means no pins exist in the output that is sent to us, then we might want to display an alert message. So remember that every JavaScript lines opening and closing should be on separate lines with its own individual EJS syntax. So we've opened this curly bracket here. Before we write our HTML, let's make sure we've closed our curly bracket as well. And now that we've done this within these opening and closing EJS JavaScript tags, we can have a div. I'm going to look here for the class names that we have predefined. So class equals to alert, alert secondary. Again, the styling using these classes is coming from Bootstrap. We can get more into Bootstrap in maybe the next class, but we don't want to focus there right now. What we are doing is using this div with class alert, space alert secondary, and role alert. This is just Bootstrap's protocol or like way of writing a div class for an alert message. Let's see what we get. But if there are no pins coming from the backends when server.js is rendering this file, then we want to display our message that says no pins exist. Okay, save this. Our server is still running. I'm going to refresh it here, and you should see a message like this that says no pins exist. A lot of the styling is coming from the starter folder that's provided to you. So you might, when you're working on assignment 2, you might want to work on that also. Oh no. Are we seeing this output?
After role alerts.
That's it. I'm going to have it side by side in case you'll need it.
Does Emmet not work when we're in EJS?
Emmet?
Yeah,
What's Emmet?
like you know how you can like do like shorthands of things. So like when I'm writing my code, for example, like whatever, I'm writing like a class code, I can go div, and then I think it was like alert, and then if I press enter. But you know how it'll do. Okay, so maybe I don't have enough. Oh, wait, no, because I made a different type of. Jump. Yeah. But that's what I'm saying, so. Oh, okay. It just. I was doing a great class, but now it's working. Okay.
That's okay. I think what might help for now is I'll give you a live share link in case you're missing out or want to go back or copy paste because of typos. That might help. So I'm going to just quickly share read only. Okay, Blackboard or announcements. You'll have used, if you haven't used LiveShare before, just clicking on this link should give you my VS Code tab in case you need it. You should be able to see these files. So you can copy paste any part that you miss or go back to it, even if I'm not there. That should be the case. But are you all seeing an output if you're following along? Or is anything confusing so far?
Sorry, where's the live share link?
It's on, okay, maybe I didn't post it. Yeah, save, post it. It's on Blackboard in your announcements. Just to get an understanding who's following along. You're following along. Are you all following along? Angie and I forgot your name, sorry. Sapphire, yeah. Are you following along? It's okay, you don't have to. You'll have this recording to look back at. Martin, everyone, you're done? Oh, you're same at? Did you change the server.js code?
Yeah, we did. It's in display.
Okay. No, this is your BJS error. You are not closing your BJS bracket or pins is not defined. Okay, let's go back to server.js. Did you refresh your server? I just think you were typing something and
Oh, great.
You didn't-
Random question after.
yeah, let's see. Let's go back to index.js.
Oh, I think it says pin.
Yeah,
Should be
singular,
pin.
line 57, first word after it.
It should be pin.
Okay.
Okay, so I should try refreshing my server every time.
Yeah, if your server's still running and you make changes, you'll need to refresh it. Now, one thing you might notice when this page loaded is that you have a responsive navigation. I'm going to increase the size of this, and it has an option or a button to create a new pin. Okay, so where that is coming from is your header partial. So let's close this. Our server again is still running. If yours is stopped, that's okay. You can always go to server.js and run and debug it again. But if you go to header.ejs, you'll see that there is a navigation that we've created there. All right. Inside the navigation, you have a button or an anchor tag that says new. Is it still not coming? Sorry.
Yeah, which is-
It might be some small. Well, that's kind of how in-class coding will help you debug it. Let's go back to server.js. You refresh this page. Server.js. So no VS Code. The previous file, the other file. Yeah, in here, when you're rendering index on line 12, you're not passing things. So it's not understanding where, like what that variable is or what it holds.
Pin.
Pins should be now. Save that, refresh your server.
Yeah, you have double browsers that it's around there.
Sorry, curly brackets around pins.
Yeah, especially for that. Pins, the purple one.
Just save it and maybe to make sure. It's already happening. If you're not comfortable with the placement of wherever this refresh thing is, then you can use that grid-like thing next to it to move it wherever you'd prefer, but I think it has to be around in the top panel area. Okay, coming back to this, in header.egs, the partial that you have been provided, there is an option, an anchor tag that says you will be redirected. Sorry, you'll be redirected to a route called pin in order to create a new pin. However, from server.js, we know that we don't have such a pin yet. Okay, so let's create it. So when the user clicks on it, they are redirected somewhere. So app.get, let's create a route called, slash singular pin. And this will also be an asynchronous route that has two parameters in it, request and response. And what this will do is in response, it's going to render our EJS file for us. Now, the EJS file that we want to render is new.ejs. So in your folder structure, you can see that besides partials in views, we have two more files. The intention is that new.ejs, we will, currently it's empty, but we will create a form area here that the user can fill out in order to submit a pin or save it in the database. So this route, when we click on the new button, this route will take us, or it should take us to the new.ejs file, and we'll use that to get a new pins information, because currently, as we can see, that no pins exist. So let's render it. Usually, if index.egs or egs file is within views directly right under it, then you just type out its name. But in this case, new.egs, the file related to our pins, is under a subfolder called pins. So we need to call that folder by its name. Views is implied under response.render. Server.js knows that EJS files that need to be rendered are inside views. But in the case of this, new.egs, since it's under the pins subfolder, we need to say that inside the pins subfolder, we have new.egs, which is what we want to render. And again, currently we are passing nothing to it. So let's have empty curly brackets. Once this is done, I'll have it open on the side. But once that is done, we will switch back to new.egs, and let's start creating a form area where we can actually get information from the user. Just to make things a little simple, I'm going to go back to index.egs and copy paste these partials. So less typing work for now. The head, header, and the footer, all of that.
Where are you copying for?
New.egs. So all of those 4 lines, including these partials, I'm just getting it from index, just out of laziness. You can type it out too, but copy paste it. So we have less to type out right now. Within this new.egs file under your pins subfolder, let's start creating a form. Now, again, I do have in the PDF provided to you, I have some classes that we'll use for styling purposes. So let's start typing that out. In here, we'll create a div with a class container. Again, if you don't want to type any of this out and you want to just wait and observe, that's what the live share link is for. Okay, so container px4 Within this, let's say we have a div class row gx5 div class. In case all of this is just all Greek or like it doesn't make sense what these classes are, actually, I'll just quickly go to Bootstrap. So Bootstrap, and Bootstrap essentially is a free CSS framework that you can use for styling purposes. So instead of creating your own style sheet, you can go here, see examples of code. So documentation. And in here, you can see the different layouts that are created. So how you can have different columns and all of that. And referencing to this framework, I'm calling upon all of these classes. So in order to create this layout, I am using container, text center, row align, and so on. Okay. So if you're not used to Bootstrap, essentially we are using this code or this framework available to us. So it's less CSS styling work, manually rather. Okay. So we are still calling upon those classes over here. Within this div, now let's call our form tag, and form method is post. Now method, unless you've done any other backend class, you must have not used this attribute too much. But now because we are expecting a response back from the user and that data we are actually collecting, it's not a dummy form. So for that reason, you need to include this method attribute, and the value in here is going to be post. What this means is that the information that the user is filling out, we are posting it or we're sending it somewhere over the server. So if you hover over it, you can see post corresponds to the HTTP post method, form data included is sent to the server. Okay, so you need to have a post method mentioned over here. Following that, once the user does submit this form, okay, we are posting that value somewhere. Under action, you need to mention where are we posting this. So when the form is created, it is submitted, you are posting the information, and here you have to mention to which route. So the route, we are going to call it pin again. The previous route that we are using to render this page is called pin. So let's keep it simple and call this action pin as well, and continue creating a form. So let's say we have one div inside which we have a label. Label always works with a for attribute where you'll have the ID of the input field that you'll create. We'll have a class, let's say form label. And within the opening and closing of this tag, we need to mention, I'm going to close this, what this form field is. So this is going to be maybe the title of our pin. Following this, we have an input field where we need to have an ID. So the ID, the input and the label are linked. So since the for is title, the ID here needs to be title. The kind of input this needs to be is text. So type is text. Class for styling purposes, we'll say form control. Okay. And ID, we already included that, sorry. But besides ID, we also need to have the name attributes. I'm going to go back here, just mention name, title. Now, before we proceed, I'm just going to quickly save this. Again, refresh your server just to see the changes. Go back to our Pinterest board. What was this? Go back to your Pinterest board. If you refresh your page and click on new, you should be redirected over here and get an error. The reason being is could not find the partials file. Okay, good error, big mistake, which is we did copy the partials from here, index.egs. Does anyone see any issue with why these headers worked for index? The error is that the partials could not be found. So could not find the included file. So the first line of code says that we should show the component we've created in head.egs, right? But we are getting an error that basically this file, new.egs, sorry?
Oh, to say the inside.
Yes, yeah, correct. So index.egs did have access directly to the partials folder, right? They are on the same level. If you just observe here, index.egs is on the same level as partials. So that file was able to access these components in here. New.egs, however, is inside a subfolder and it doesn't have direct access to the partial subfolder. So to fix this, what's the fix? Yeah, // to go one folder outside. So every place, the 4 places that we included are partials. I'm going to zoom out. Just copy paste this // What that means is we are going one folder outside. So new.egs is going one folder outside and now it has access to partials. Okay, save this. Once you've included this // for all 4 of your components that you have included, you can refresh, save your file, refresh your server. Okay, // looks good. Go back, refresh your page, click on new. There's still an
the new EJS, not index.
Where did I put it? Oh my God, sorry, you're right. I was going between files. Save. Good catch. Yes, it should be here. // Save, refresh. Let's go back again. We go back to our default route, refresh our page. Now, when you click on new, it should render this page for us. So it's essentially, it's not saying new.egs, it's displaying the pin get method route for us. And so far, all that we've created is this title area. So since this is working, good thing we checked that at least one of our form fields is working. Now that we have this, other elements that we'll require. So if you're creating a Pinterest board, what you'll need is essentially the title for your pin, the image, and the description for your pin. So we have title. We can just copy and paste and create 2 more fields. And the next field is not title. Let's say it's image URL. So that's what we'll change the label to be. And lastly, we have description. This isn't sufficient. We need to make sure that if we are going the copy paste route, we do modify the IDs and everything properly. Each of these input fields should be identified in its own unique way. So we can't have the ID for attribute and name be title. I'm going to use the Control D shortcut to select all 3 of these one by one and edit it simultaneously. You can see we have 3 cursors. I'm going to change the name from title to image. Control D. So you see when you select certain parts of your text, even if it's just a div, okay, the word that you're selecting, it'll highlight in VS Code other words that are similar. It doesn't check the matching case, okay? So if you want to change this title, it would have gotten changed as well, and it's going to select everything one by one. So we have 4 images here. Now, if I press Control D, you see that this also got selected. There's a cursor here. So everything gets edited simultaneously. If you make it capital, all 4 get edited. I want
to be a capital.
No, it doesn't have to be. I was just explaining.
Oh.
So we have our image. Again, an example for it is down here. We still have all of these 3 elements saying title. It should be description. So I'm going to do Control D. You see that now we have 3 blinking cursor lines, and I'll change their value also from title to description.
It's just doing per line for me.
Per line?
You should hit Control
Command
B multiple times.
Oh.
Control B like 2 times so that
If
it
I
select.
do this, it just did this.
Yeah.
Now it's.
Yeah, that's
Oh, okay, again.
Oh, we've changed the description. So again, it doesn't see case, it's just going to match.
So for me, it just did it's every.
So even if I want to select this much with this single double inverted commas, all one by one, every double inverted comma that it encounters, it will go line by line and highlight and select all of them. Shortcuts, you take a second to get used to it. If it's not working, don't focus, just change those values one by one. Save. We'll just finish this method, and once we do, we can maybe take a break. Actually, let's take a break right now because we'll need to set up MongoDB. Let's come back at 25.